AI Realized, the podcast about everything that is new, now, and next for enterprise executives deploying AI. Hosted by myself, Christina Elwood, and my collaborator, David Yakubovich.
Our guests will share what's driving AI adoption, use cases, and business models for the data and AI economy.
Where the future is bright.
Welcome to AI Realized, the podcast for enterprise executives leading AI deployments. From addressing security, data, and operations challenges to managing the organizational and management changes, AI deployment presents the opportunity to redesign our organizations from the inside out. I'm Christina Elwood, your host for today's episode. We're talking today with Chris Butler, the Staff Product Operations Manager for GitHub. Chris, welcome to AI Realized.
Great. Thank you for having me. And I'm excited to talk about the way that we leverage AI, not only for our products, but also for the way we do our work.
That sounds great. But just before we get into AI, I'd love to just have you give us a distinction between a product manager and a product operations manager.
Absolutely. So a product manager, I see them as someone that's really trying to push innovation within the organization. They're trying to make sure that we're addressing kind of customer needs and providing customer value, but we're also creating things that in the end create business value so that we can continue to exist as an organization. I would say that there's an interesting spectrum between them and project managers, program managers, TPMs, where those types of roles are really trying to reduce risk within the organization and how we deliver software, usually through a software development lifecycle. But they're important extremes on a spectrum, and we need to have them basically pulling in different directions to be able to build something that is not only like innovative, but also something that is deliverable. And so every industry requires a different place on the spectrum because medical work, for example, requires a lot more de-risking than something like a very early stage, like B2C startup, where you're just doing lots of experimentation. I would say product operations, what I do is maybe, I would call it maybe, because it is focused on operations, like the way we do work. I think of myself as actually a PM for the PM experience. And so what that means is that I'm there to understand the way that the PM organization works together. And that's usually focused on the way that leaders work with their teams, but also the way that teams work with each other. And then the way those product managers end up kind of building the healthy tensions with other groups like project managers or engineers, designers, but also the idea of like legal, privacy, security, safety, responsible AI. Those are all different groups that end up coming together to create a product. And so my role is to really make sure that those PMs are being as effective as possible.
That sounds like a fascinating role and one that is cross-functional in many ways. And I understand that you have an area of specialty that perhaps other people have not heard of before. You have a unique personal brand, Chaotic Good Product Manager. What is a chaotic good product manager? I know what a good product manager is, but what's a chaotic one?
Yeah. A chaotic good product manager, this is a bit of an Easter egg for the Dungeons and Dragons nerds that are out there, which I used to be one. I still play some role-playing games, by the way, but like chaotic good is an alignment within the Dungeons and Dragons like character system. And what it really says is, how do you approach the world? And the way that I mean chaotic good product manager is that I approach the world in such a way that I think a lot about that the rules that are there, especially when it comes to the way that software is developed, the way that we consider our customers' needs, that sometimes we fall into patterns or certainty that is undue certainty. And so it's my job to try to mix that up a bit. And that can be through a lot of different techniques. Sometimes it's really asking just important questions. Other times it's helping create a workshop that allows for the right type of information to come out. Even meeting design is something I think a lot about. And just organizationally, like how do we build the dynamics inside the team so that we're always thinking about the most important thing. And so that's where chaotic good comes in. And it means I might be a little mischievous as well sometimes when it comes to the way that I build these systems. But that's what it means.
I think that's probably a good thing because most people associate chaos and randomness with badness, not with goodness. So I think that's a good thing that you're more mischievous about it than maybe serious.
And let me be clear too, the world is a very uncertain place, especially in the AI kind of environment and world and everybody building stuff. No one knows very much right now about the end kind of place that these tools are going to be in. We're like at a place where we were moving from like web to mobile, where we didn't know. It was a lot of like apps for like fake lighters and like slot machines and stuff like that. We didn't really get to something like TikTok yet, which is a brand new way for people to interact with media in a very mobile approach. And so we're at that place right now with AI. And so I think teams that do consider themselves very certain about the future, they're wrong. And I would say that my personal motto is that I'm wrong today, I just don't know how yet. And so for me, that chaos actually allows us to at least understand that we cannot always control everything. And then it allows us to build systems and organizations and even products that can be resilient inside of this kind of highly complex and uncertain world, essentially.
Besides accounting for that fact of uncertainty and imagining all of the ways things could go wrong or be used at the extremes, are you also trying to help the teams to be more innovative and maybe create products that otherwise they might not consider because they aren't within some very narrow confines?
Yeah, that's right. I think a lot of the time product teams fall into this like highly iterative pattern where once they see something that is successful, they continue to just keep working on that towards like fixing problems. And there's like a method or I guess a framework that Kent Beck, who was one of the original signers of the Agile Manifesto, he worked at Facebook for a while, really on like team dynamics. But he talks about this like 3X model on an S curve, which is that when we talk about like technology adoption in general, we go through three very distinct phases. One, at the very bottom of the S curve, is explore, where we're creating lots of experiments, ideally very cheap experiments, very rapid experiments to understand what would be valuable, how we create value, how we deliver value. At the kind of like hockey stick part where things start to go up, that is called expand. And inside of that realm, everything is breaking. You're finding new bottlenecks. People continue to want to have more and more. And then finally, there's the kind of extract or exploit at the very top, which is that you're going to get off this curve of creating brand new stuff and you're going to optimize everything. And so I think whenever we talk to teams, they're somewhere on this curve for even for a product or a feature. They don't always understand. And so they end up maybe creating dynamics inside of their world where it's not appropriate for the stage that they're in. And so my role, and at least this understanding of like, how do we do a better job of kind of pushing for innovation is that in the explore area, again, it's how are we experimenting and learning as rapidly as we can. And so setting up systems to allow for that learning is really important. And then same thing for like in the expand, like detecting the bottlenecks and addressing the most important ones that are going to stop people from using our technology. So I think that's the thing. Again, it is all about innovation inside of each one of those different areas. I tend to specialize in the explore or expand type of products, but I would say that there is absolutely in that exploit or extract, the idea of optimization is also a creative act, right? Because you're taking something that's very hard to do maybe and making it very simple, or reducing the complexity of a system so that it's more resilient and robust. And so I would just say that is my job as this type of product ops person, is to help set up the environment by which those people can make those types of innovative decisions, of course, with tension to the other teams that are asking for other types of optimizations or things that they want to get done, basically, or the goals they have. And so that's really how I see my role is helping leverage innovation or create systems that allow for innovation within a team.
I think it's fair to say that many product managers are attracted to the role because of the structure and the predictability and the sort of certainty element of it. So, how did you come to specialize in chaos, bias, uncertainty, and randomization?
Yeah, I think so. I grew up as like an apprentice to my dad, who was an art director. And this was during a changeover from X-Acto knives, spray adhesive, and typesetting. And so it was like a very antiquated world, at least, of kind of the way that we end up doing design of a print ad, for example. And I helped him come into the new world of digital layout and Quark Express and Adobe Illustrator and all this stuff, right? And then I ended up going into engineering school because I had an affinity for computers. I would say that I was gray hat-ish when it came to computer security stuff when I was in high school. And then I was interviewing at a bunch of different places. And I got job offers from like Motorola in like secure radio development, or General Dynamics in like secure networking. And I could have become an engineer that was really focused on that. But I realized, I guess, internally that doing programming was not the thing that I loved. It was actually like figuring out the problems that help that then we build the thing to do. And I interviewed at Microsoft, and they, for some reason, actually put me in the program manager track, which at the time was a weird in between a product and project manager. And the interview question they asked me was, how would you design a washer dryer combo for someone that is sight impaired? And this really sparked a lot of interesting questions for me. And it made me consider that like actually the thing that I want to do is continue to solve these problems and to continue to help build things for people. And so that was maybe the first transition, was like going from this idea of just like very interesting, like creative kind of backgrounds into this world of like, how do we now build products that are for people? As I continued on that path and I did product management, tech evangelism, I did some like hybrid roles at like Waze and Kayak that were like BD and product, which I think business development is just like a different type of product management, honestly. It just ends up using other companies' resources together. I started to see that we wanted to do the right thing. We wanted to make decisions that were right for ourselves, but we kept on being stuck in hierarchies, in power structures, in the way that we ended up making decisions. We would just make the safe decision rather than the decision that would push us into a better direction. And so all of that really made me start to study and understand not only human bias, right? So like the idea of system 1 and 2 thinking, from the idea of thinking fast and slow, that was maybe like an entry point into that. Like biases are things that are there. After a little while, though, I started to realize that the reason why, and again, this is not, and there's lots of researchers that have done this. It was like a personal journey that, yeah, there are biases. They exist for a reason. And it's because we live in a world of like limited information, limited time, limited resources. And so that's why we have biases, is to help us guide us through this world of like multiple optionality. And then I started to think, how might I actually leverage the way that we make decisions to more often make better decisions than bad decisions? And I think like better or bad decisions is maybe not a good terminology either, because it's really focused on the outcome. When the reality is like, because the world is uncertain and complex, you will make a decision and it will be wrong sometimes. And when I say wrong, it will just not have the impact that you wanted. And so from that perspective, we want to then leverage the best decision-making process that we can, because that decision-making process will hopefully give us better outcomes overall rather than worse outcomes overall. But we don't know for sure. That's the uncertainty. And so helping people adjust and adapt to that, helping them be resilient inside teams and as a product in the environment of the marketplace, I think that's where this kind of like journey took me to, was that kind of considering more, I guess, like meta or more abstract or cross-domain types of things that we can adjust to be able to help in those cases.
You're helping them to, rather than shut down the uncertainty, to include it in the dynamic. And of course, research has shown that the companies that outperform their competitors are companies that make good decisions. And those decisions are defined not just by what we initially think of when we hear good decision, which is the decision itself, go, no go type of thing. It actually includes the process of executing the decision, evaluating the decision, and then feeding back and reconsidering whether or not the decision was good. Is that your experience as well? You've worked with a lot of different companies who have been very successful, and you've joined them at different points in their journey. Is that your observation as well?
Yeah, I think that teams will always struggle as they get larger and larger in the way that decision making ends up being calcified, I guess you could say, right? Especially when you start to have structures where you have to pass a decision up the hierarchy. What ends up happening is there's this paper from, I think it's like 1985 or 6 or something like that, about this concept of dominant logic, which is that people that are successful, they end up using their past mental models for decision making in current situations because they were successful. And that's usually people that are higher up in the org. The problem is that filters out variants of ideas, variants of ways of doing work, and it actually ends up eventually creating a circumstance by which they'll make the wrong decision, or a decision that has a bad outcome more often than not because of those past experiences. And so I agree. I think that like teams that I've worked with that are very dynamic and adjust to the environment, they not only are moving fast, right? That's one of the things. In a very highly volatile environment, you want to keep trying a lot of things. But it's also that we reconsider what are maybe considered to be like dogmas or norms or kind of ways of doing things inside of the organization. I think what's really interesting, and a little side project I'm probably not ready to announce, but I'd like to talk about maybe the discussion around what does it mean to basically use these types of LLMs inside of decision making. And I think I would not want a system to make a decision on something that is not heuristic based. And what I mean by that is that, yes, LLMs can come up with a lot of very interesting content. They can do very interesting things when it comes to pseudo analysis of what's going on, right? But when they're given a brand new situation, I don't think that they can quite yet make a new decision based on new information and circumstance. They'll fall back to the things that they were trained on or it was trained on, right? And so I think there's this opportunity for how do we actually have something that is not emotionally involved, right? It's not part of the hierarchy. It doesn't care about power inside of the system. And it can actually ask questions or give examples of other cases that we should then reconsider our current thinking. And so that's why I think there's some really interesting things around not only the idea of, say, summarization. As a product ops person, every new organization I go to wants a new status reporting infrastructure. And so there's things there just about like, how do we do a better job of like how that information passes not only within the team, but also to other people up the hierarchy and across the hierarchy, like how does summarization happen? I think there's a lot of interest, like LLMs can be a huge benefit of that tool as a tool to be able to do that going forward. But then I would also say as a PM, being able to maybe not come up with the idea, because I think abductive thinking is something that a lot of product managers do, which is like taking a leap based on evidence rather than assuming some type of deduction back and forth between evidence and rules, for example, which is deductive reasoning. And so I think there's like this opportunity that once we want to try to make this leap, right, as a product manager, we talk to a lot of customers, we see a market environment that we want to now do something different. I think this idea of an LLM being available to take on different personas, maybe to ask really hard questions and to ask things that maybe you wouldn't have considered previously. And this is something that I've found over and over again. Like I've used LLMs to be able to like, here's a process that I'm thinking about implementing. What do you think is going to be confusing for people about this process? Or can you please play out how someone might go through this process and the problems they would have, right? Or what are things here that I'm not thinking of? Or what are best practices that I should consider that are here? And again, right now I would say about like 80% of the stuff is not helpful. It's things I've already thought of. But there's like a few things that are probably from some other domain that I had not considered that if I ask that question, it will make the decision-making I'm doing better in some way.
Yeah, I think LLMs as thought partners is a fabulous use case for them, really, for the reason that you just articulated. But I think there's another really interesting aspect of this whole AI generation for your work, which is that it's changed all the rules or it's removed a lot of rules, created uncertainty for people in a way that they don't normally have in their operating life. So you have a provocateur in this, you don't know, right? We don't know what it's going to do. We don't know how it's going to fit in or whatever, which maybe creates the opportunity for you to have more elasticity in people's thinking. Are you finding that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's good because it pushes you in different directions. But I would also say that, so I did some work at a company called Philosophy that was like a boutique design consultancy where we were building basically like a multi-agent system through a conversational agent to help out these like field service operations dispatchers, which are people that are like taking in like a request for service and then dispatching service workers, but also trying to understand, do we know what the solution to this problem is just based on the explanation, for example. We did a bunch of research. We were saying like, do you understand what this system is doing and do you like it or not? And there are two domains of the I understand what it's doing and I like it. And there's the I understand what it's doing and I don't like it. And at first we thought of like the I understand what it's doing and I like it is we built the right thing. And then the other one is I don't like it, we thought of as like job security issues. After thinking about it over a couple of years and like giving that talk about that user research, I think I've reframed it in a way that like the things that I know what it's doing and I like what it's doing, it's actually getting rid of the bullshit parts of my job. And it's doing the busy work for me. And it's doing the things that I really just don't enjoy about my job because it's not the creative part. And the other side, which is I don't like that it's doing this stuff, really were all things that are about human connection. And they're about the idea of I'm finding meaning in my work to do this. And so I think there's like a distinction that we should be making is that for all of these tools, an operations person, a TPM, an executive assistant, some of their job is to do summarization, for example. And the fact that they have to do that, and it is daunting work sometimes. If you're not the person that wrote something and then summarize it, you're trying to get into the mindset of what that person wants. And so I would say like that type of work will start to go away because it will be done automatically. And so I think, yes, we have to start to then consider the organizational dynamics. We have to consider the creativity. Those are the human things that we're really good at, or making exceptions. I would also say that humans are really good at phoning it in when appropriate. Like we are lazy people. We are trying to optimize our energy at all times. And I think like our job is to also tell the system like, hey, this is just not worth for you to do right now. And so I think that distinction between what is good human stuff versus machine stuff, I think will become more and more clear as time goes on.
So what do you see as the future of AI for development teams at GitHub?
I think like we're really focused right now on the developer experience. How do we make it so that as they're thinking about algorithms in their head or the way to build something, that they can just make it happen and do it in a way that is very low cost to them and helps them, right, in a lot of ways. I think longer term, though, the reason why I joined GitHub is, and mostly because I'm focused on my role as like an operations person, is I think there's like a real opportunity for the fact that we can start to do this for all of the teams that work together. And it's not just engineers. So I could imagine a world where a product manager comes up with a concept, does some kind of work with an agent to create kind of an idea, a conceptual idea that can automatically be built, at least in a boilerplate type of level. A designer can come in and create mock-ups in Figma or something like that type of tool, and that updates the boilerplate. But then as the engineer is making changes to this work, there are trade-offs that they're making. And so those trade-offs then being illustrated in a way that a product manager can understand inside of whatever they written, or inside of like a design as a designer can understand, or even as the idea of what would a customer, like all the customer feedback we got, what would that potential customer think about this trade-off? It starts to then be like translation across all of these different practices in a way that ends up becoming this kind of like in between to be able to make sure that everybody understands each other. And I think that's the future of like software development. And that's what I'm really excited about.
Yeah, that sounds great, actually.
Every doc that's written is suddenly out of date all the time. And so that's just the reality of the world today.
For sure. So as we wrap up, what would you like our listeners to take away from our conversation today?
Yeah, I think like for a lot of people that are trying out these tools for internal use cases, there's two things. There's first, you should just try them out, right? Like you should understand where they're not working. Like you should really keep an open mind, but you should try them. And then second of all, I think there's like a lot of work that needs to be done inside of organizations from an IT, HR, and like responsible AI standpoint. Like how do we make it so that it's safe for people to experiment with these things? Because I'm betting you that a lot of people that are using these tools today are doing so with ChatGPT on a personal account rather than some type of like internally confidential, secure type of system. And so I think I want to push those teams that are, again, IT, HR, responsible AI, legal, to do a better job of actually creating those environments that are helpful inside of these organizations rather than just putting out a page that says you cannot use this because they then cover their ass when it comes to legal things, right? So I think that's the thing that I really want to maybe push on is that we need to have people trying this stuff out and we need to make it safe for them to do so.
Yeah, for sure. Chris Butler, Staff Product Operations Manager for GitHub. Thank you for talking with me today on AI Realized.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm excited for the conference. So thank you again.